At the time this story happened, I was working at a well-known Civil War fort on the coast of Maine. I worked in the office as the assistant to the executive director of the non-profit that ran the place. But on weekends and when volunteers didn't show up, I would cover the gift shop. This particular weekend, it was the tail end of October, near the end of the open season, but also the weekend of one of our biggest fundraisers, turning the fort into a gigantic haunted house. It was a cold day, raining cats and dogs, so no one was around. Other than myself in the main torpedo shed building and the attendant at the gate, the place was completely deserted. The director had been in and out all day, repairing Halloween set pieces that had fallen down, putting new things up, and fiddling with the lighting. But by this time, he had gone home to rest before the event started up again that night. I was all alone in the gift shop, reading and recovering from haunting the fort for 5 hours in the cold granite building the night before. I don't remember what time this guy came in, but it was sometime in the early afternoon. I greeted him as he entered the shop, then went back to folding shirts or whatever I was doing at the time. I don't remember him greeting me back. He just kind of looked around the shop for a moment before turning toward the candy rack, which was directly across from the register, perpendicular to me. About 5 minutes passed, and I realized this guy was still standing in front of the candy rack. He wasn't moving at all, not reaching for any candy, not even shifting his head to look at the displays. He was just still. I didn't lift my head because I didn't want him to know I was checking on him, so I subtly glanced at him through my hair. I had long bangs. A chill of dread ran through me when I realized he was facing the candy rack, but staring directly at me from the corner of his eye. He had been doing this for the past 5 minutes. His eyes were intense. There's no other way to describe it. I instantly knew he meant to hurt me if given the chance. I didn't freeze, but inside I felt ice cold. I was completely alone in the building with this guy. No one was around, and if something happened, no one would hear it or come to help me. I finished folding the shirts and was considering my options, trying to act blasé while secretly freaking out. Imagine my relief when one of the volunteers and my boss walked in. I was saved. They walked around the lobby, picking up things and getting ready to head out and prepare the displays. Meanwhile, the guy at the candy rack still hadn't moved a muscle and was still staring at me. It had been over 10 minutes by now, and I was seriously unnerved. I tried to catch the volunteers or my boss's attention, to get them to come into the gift shop and help me out. But they were too focused on what they were doing, and after a moment, they left me alone again. That was it. I was doomed. This guy was going to vault over the counter any moment and assault me. I was in my early 20s and a lot more timid back then, so I didn't know what to do. I was trying to be polite for some reason. Also, I'm 5'10" and weighed 130 pounds soaking wet, so the only defense I might have had was my fury. But I knew I'd easily be overpowered. I had visions of people returning to the building and finding my lifeless body behind the counter, or not finding me at all. I wanted to get out of there, but the only door was within arm's reach of him. The gift shop was small. If I passed him, it would give him the perfect opportunity to grab me. But unable to stand his gaze any longer, and not caring if he stole the entire gift shop, I quickly skirted around the corner of the counter, and rushing past him, hightailed it to the office, shutting and locking the door behind me. I stood there for a moment, listening, my heart pounding. The office had big windows, and as I grabbed my purse and phone, I was sure I'd look up any minute and see him standing outside, staring in, or hear him trying to get in through the door. I quickly texted my sister, telling her there was some guy here creeping me out and to call the gate so the rangers could come down. I was too afraid to speak aloud, worried it might provoke him. I didn't want him to know I knew he was watching me. Feeling obligated to return, I pocketed my phone and headed back out into the gift shop, praying someone else would come in the meantime. The guy was still there, now looking at the candy again, but I knew as soon as I got back behind the counter, he'd resume staring at me. I couldn't do it. I quickly turned back and hid in the office again, terrified. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the lobby door open and my sister's voice. She had shown up with not only herself but several of our friends who had been hanging out at our house, along with our big protective German shepherd. The guy was gone. I was so relieved to see them all, but also freaked out at the idea that he might come back. When the Rangers arrived, I gave them a description of the guy, but they couldn't find him anywhere in the park. My sister and our friends stayed with me for the rest of my shift, which thankfully wasn't long. When my boss returned, we gave him a piece of our minds for not noticing my obvious distress and leaving me alone with a creep. I never saw that guy again. Alright, so this was probably about 6 or 7 years ago. I was around 16 or 17 in Ohio. I went to school near the supposedly haunted Gore Orphanage Road, and being stupid high schoolers, we obviously decided it would be fun to go adventure seeking, even though driving down the road from dusk till dawn was illegal due to drug activity. I'll tell you this, I never went back after this, and I don't plan to in the future. If you haven't heard of it, the legend goes like this. There was an orphanage called Gore Orphanage in the Amherst, Ohio area, where a fire supposedly killed all the children and the caretaker. I'm recalling this from memory, as I actually did a research paper on the place one year, but I'm sure I'm missing some details. One thing became clear during my research. The legend is total BS. Now, back to the actual story. It was a Friday night, sometime during football season, probably October. My friends and I had decided to go to a nearby town for a late-night dinner. We were just hanging out, talking about school and random stuff, when 3 of my friends, a guy and 2 girls who I won't name, brought up the subject of Gore Orphanage. Stupidly, we all decided to go around midnight. We drove out to where the road begins. It goes downhill into a marsh-like area, and there's a gate that was supposed to be closed, but it wasn't. I didn't think much of it at the time because I'd been down that road a few times before, and it was never closed, not even after dark. We made our way downhill, messing with each other in the car, trying to scare one another. My male friend was driving, I was in the passenger seat, and the 2 girls were in the back. The road curves to the right near the marsh, and further down there's a 1-vehicle bridge. I remember it because of the copious amounts of graffiti on the metal guardrails and a sign at the far end of the bridge. I can't remember what kind of sign it was. On the other side of the bridge, there's a little turnaround point. The road dead ends not far from there, and on the right side is the trail to the supposed Gore Orphanage ruins. We briefly discussed parking the car and going down the trail. Yeah, fuck that, we thought. Instead of turning around there, we decided to go all the way to the end of the road to the actual turnaround. My friend put the car in park, shut off the engine, and turned off the headlights. It was all stupid, harmless fun, just scaring the girls. We sat there for about 5 minutes before deciding we'd had enough, and it was time to go home. My friend turned the car back on, lights on, put it in drive, and we headed back down the road. Everything seemed normal until we got close to where the trail started. On the left side, at the turnaround, there was a truck parked with the engine off. Holy shit, where the hell did that come from? I thought. We were all on edge at this point. My friend driving just sat there a few feet away from the truck, foot on the brake, convinced it was just another group of idiots like us who gave in to the idea of going down the trail. I didn't care to find out and told him to get us out of there. But this is where it gets absolutely insane. We drove forward at a calm speed, passing the truck and making the slight left turn onto the bridge. And right there, on the bridge, were 10 or 12 people in tattered robes of various colors. Some were hooded, some were not, and the faces of the unhooded ones were covered in shitty tattoos, dirt, and nasty beards. Worse, they were brandishing shotguns and hunting rifles, just staring at us as we came into view. At that moment, I was mortified, thinking, holy shit, we're about to fucking die. The girls were flipping out, But what my friend did next is something I'll forever be thankful for. As stupid as we'd been up until this point, I'm glad that immediately upon seeing this weird cult-like group, my friend just gunned it, not even considering the possibility of hitting one of them. We sped past them, along the marshlands to our right, and flew up the hill, back onto the main road. None of us could believe what we'd just seen. It felt like we were in a goddamn Stephen King novel. We joked about it afterward, probably just to lighten the mood, because we had almost died. So I get home, about 15 minutes away from all that, and for obvious reasons, I can't sleep. I stayed up all night, doing whatever I did back then, playing video games or watching TV probably. Around 5:30 a.m., my dad came home from work. He's a state trooper and sometimes patrols the local area. To this day, I'm a little confused as to why he asked me this, almost like he psychically knew I'd been an idiot that night. He said, "Were you down by Gore Orphanage Road tonight?" Thinking he'd be pissed if I said yes, I lied. "No, why?" I asked. As he started taking off his bulletproof vest and gun belt, he told me, "We got a weird call about some satanic crap, like chanting and fire down in the woods, from Mr. X. I asked if he went down there, and he said he did, shining his cruiser's spotlight into the woods, but found nothing. Mr. X was the father of my friend who was driving that night. At first, I thought my friend must have told his dad what happened, but I later realized that wasn't the case for two reasons. One, I don't know why he would say anything to his dad about fire or satanic chanting. We didn't see any of that. Two, they live literally a 5-minute walk from that area, so he might have been able to see and hear things himself. After that, things went back to normal for me and the two girls, but my friend who lived nearby started being stalked. People would show up on his front lawn, staring at his house every couple of nights. They'd spray paint stuff on the trees in his yard too, but he never told me what they wrote. Thankfully, the stalking stopped after 2 or 3 weeks, once law enforcement started hanging around more. As curious as I still am about what those people were doing down there, I think it's better that I don't know. Whether they were worshiping Satan, sacrificing a goat, or cooking crystal meth, I'm just glad my friend's car didn't get a makeover with pieces of my brain. This story takes place in October 1977. When my mom was 16, she ran away from her abusive home along with her friend Lisa. They hitchhiked from Massachusetts all the way to California. Obviously, this wasn't the brightest of plans, but given my mom's tumultuous home life and past experiences, she didn't think it could be much more dangerous than what she had already been through. They had a pretty safe and uneventful trip across the country, finding friends in many truck drivers and other travelers. It wasn't until they reached California that the real encounter happened. The hillside strangler, initially thought to be one man, ended up being 2 men who were later caught and brought to justice for 10 murders. So my mom and Lisa ended up meeting 2 guys who seemed super nice. They crashed at the guy's place for a few days, partying. But nothing bad had happened at this point. These guys told my mom and her friend that they were going to take them to the Hollywood Hills and Sunset Boulevard to see the sights. Not being from the area, my mom had no idea that these places were crime-ridden at the time, especially considering they were supposed to be sightseeing. My mom really wanted to see where all the movie stars lived. These guys took my mom and her friend to a divey restaurant and got them super drunk. It was also the first time my mom was introduced to and tried cocaine. After these underage girls were completely high and drunk, they split off into pairs, and my mom's friend disappeared with one of the guys. Now, my mom was left hanging out with just one of her new friends. He then suggested that they stand on the sidewalk on Sunset Boulevard in the middle of the night, and if or when a car pulled up, she should get in and direct the driver to a dark parking lot across the street. It wasn't until the first and only car pulled up, and she got in, that she realized this guy was prostituting her out. Keep in mind, These guys had been nothing but kind and respectful to my young mom and her friend for the past few days. Also, very sadly, this type of abuse was not a new concept to her. She got into the car, and instead of pulling into the parking lot, the driver kept going straight. My mom told him he was going the wrong way, but he just started driving faster. My mom moved toward the door, but he locked it, hit her, and tried to hold her down all at the same time. He told her she wasn't going anywhere. My mom knew she had to get out of that car or she would be dead. In one swift move, she unlocked the door, tucked, and rolled out of the car. His car screeched to a halt. My mom saw some bushes in front of a house and ran to hide behind them. The driver turned around, looking for her, creeping along the street. His passenger side was facing where she was hiding, and through the bushes, she could see that he had a gun. As soon as his car crept past, she ran to a backyard. But it was fenced in. There was no other way out, so she had to go back the way she came. By the time she crawled back into the bushes to see if he was still around, she saw his car at the end of the road, turning around again. He passed by, and when she thought he was far enough away, she crawled out of the bushes to run. But then she saw his brake lights. Confident he had seen her, she ran as fast as possible around a corner. She could still hear his car, so she ducked and hid behind some parked cars on the road. Once he passed by again, she booked it across the street, through the parking lot where she was originally supposed to go, and back to her friend. The creep did circle back again, but by then she was with her friend, and they were leaving the area. My mom and her friend quickly ditched those two assholes and found a safer place to stay. Not long after, my mom called home and eventually made it back safely. It wasn't until much later that she saw a news story about women being murdered and recognized the killer, dubbed the Hillside Strangler, as the man who had picked her up that night. This event takes place in Washington State in early October of 2010. My girlfriend Beth had flown from Sydney, Australia to visit me. I lived in Seattle, but since it was cheaper for her to book a flight from Sydney to Vancouver, BC, than to Seattle, we decided to spend a bit of time in BC and work our way back to Seattle. After a couple of days in Vancouver, we took a ferry to Vancouver Island in Victoria, where we stayed at the Empress Hotel. The plan was to take a ferry from Victoria back to Anacortes, Washington, and then catch a bus, train, or something to Seattle. Making the most of our last day in Victoria, we didn't get to the ferry terminal before the final ferry of the day, which I think departed around 10 p.m. Upon arriving in Anacortes, if you're familiar with how a ferry works, you know there's about 10 minutes or so when a flood of cars disembarks along with foot traffic, as people head to the parking lot to get in their cars. I had miscalculated on a couple of fronts. When I checked what I believed to be a bus terminal, there was clearly no bus on the way. There were no cabs either, no public transit options, and whatever kind souls who might have helped us out quickly vanished into the night. The other miscalculation was that the Anacortes ferry terminal was much further outside the city of Anacortes than I had remembered. The road from the ferry winds along for a mile or more through a wooded area, with no pedestrian footpath, not uncommon for Washington. To make matters worse, it was raining, as is typical for that time of year. We were stranded, luggage in tow. As the ferry traffic disappeared and we began to wonder what the hell we were going to do, we were approached by a man. He had a smile on his face, and didn't seem the least bit concerned about also appearing stranded. I recall him being a bit bigger than me, both in height and weight, probably in his 40s, wearing glasses, a raincoat, and a wide-brimmed hat, which he doffed in greeting. At least one of us was dressed appropriately for the weather. He shook my hand, and we got to talking about the predicament we were in. He explained that he was waiting for his mom and sister to come pick him up. They were driving down from Bellingham to get him. He said he could offer us a ride once they arrived. I declined, saying we were going the other way to Seattle, not Bellingham. We continued making small talk, and he offered again. "Are you sure you don't want a ride? They should be here soon." But I stuck to declining, as it didn't seem convenient for anyone. At this point, I was resigned to just finding a hotel room in Anacortes for the night. Eventually, Beth, who had started to walk up the road away from the ferry terminal, motioned to me. "Mike, let's go." There was a pleading urgency in her voice and face. I said okay, bid the stranger farewell, and we started walking up the road into the dark and rain, luggage in tow. To my surprise, Beth was alarmed by the encounter, pointing out that the man hadn't been on the ferry. He was already standing at the terminal when everyone got off the boat. She also noted that he never removed his right hand from his coat pocket. He doffed his hat, shaken my hand, but never took that hand out of his pocket. I honestly hadn't noticed. Beth, of course, was having visions of me shot in the woods, and Lord only knows what would have happened to her. So we trekked up the road and eventually found an inn. But apparently, there was some sort of convention in Anacortes that weekend, and every room in town was booked solid. We called a cab to take us to a nearby town where we could get a room in a hotel. During our time walking up the road and waiting for the cab, we never saw a car that could have been the man's mom and sister. In fact, we didn't see any cars at all. In the years since, Beth, now my wife, and I often joke that this was our close encounter with a serial killer. Half joking, of course, but also half wondering if news might ever come to light about something horrible along the northern coast of Puget Sound. This happened to me and my mom a few months ago, back in October. It took place in a very rural part of New Hampshire, in a side road off a side road type of neighborhood. It was pouring rain, as it had been for most of the day. My mom had just returned from down the street in my sister's car, and I was on the couch in the living room when, suddenly, I heard the doorbell ring. Our front door has a large glass pane so we can look out and someone can look in. Through the window pane, I saw a man. I didn't get a great look at him since I wasn't wearing my long-distance glasses. The man noticed that I saw him and waved, trying to appear friendly. For the rest of this story, I'll refer to him as Poncho Man. I got up and considered opening the door for Poncho Man, but decided against it. Since I couldn't see him clearly, I didn't want to let a stranger into the house. Instead, I went down the hall to my parents' bedroom, where my mom was getting ready for work. She asked me what was up, and I explained that a man in a poncho was outside our door and wanted to talk to us. My mom went white as a ghost. She immediately stopped what she was doing, locked the bedroom door, and began checking all the windows to ensure they were locked. I asked her what was going on. My mom explained that, as she was driving home, she had seen Poncho Man standing motionless on the side of the main road. As soon as she turned onto our road, he started walking, seemingly to follow her. She thought it was strange, but didn't dwell on it. After all, why would someone be standing out in the pouring rain, down a back road in the afternoon? It was like he was waiting for something. Now I started to panic as well. My mom called my aunt, they're best friends, and asked what we should do. My aunt told her to call the police immediately, which we did. We then paced around the bedroom, frantically looking out the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of Poncho Man. From where the bedroom was, we couldn't see the front porch, so we didn't know if he was still there, but we were desperate for any sign of him. After what felt like hours, we finally saw a police car pull up. We carefully unlocked the door and went down to let the officer in. We explained what had happened, and he agreed to check the neighborhood. As he left, I noticed something hanging on the doorknob. It was a political flyer for a candidate running for office. It's possible Poncho Man was just campaigning, but there are a lot of holes in that theory. First of all, it was pouring rain. Why would anyone go door to door in such bad weather? And why choose such a rural neighborhood? The houses are far apart, so you wouldn't reach many people on foot. The timing didn't make sense either. It was around 4 in the afternoon. Most people would still be at work, so knocking on doors wouldn't be very effective. Eventually, the officer returned. He had found the guy down the road and questioned him. Poncho Man was able to identify himself and claimed he was campaigning. However, when the officer asked if he had more flyers, Poncho Man said the one on our house was his last. This made the story even more suspicious. Our house isn't the last on the street, so why wouldn't he have enough flyers for the whole neighborhood? Even the officer found this unusual and told us it was odd behavior. Although the officer was suspicious, there wasn't much he could do, as there was no way to prove intent. He advised us to stay alert and not hesitate to call if Poncho Man returned. Fast forward a few weeks, and I began noticing that a police car seemed to be permanently stationed down the road from us, about a 3-minute drive away. Curious, I asked my mom about it. She told me that several houses down the road had been broken into, and the police were conducting a sting operation. The Poncho Man encounter and the break-ins may be unrelated, but given Poncho Man's behavior, I have a sinking feeling that they are connected. Thankfully, we haven't seen or heard anything about Poncho Man for the past few months. We installed a new doorbell system with a camera, and the police have left the area. I hope this whole situation is over.